Welcome, everyone. We'll be starting in just a few moments. We're just going to give the public a few more moments to just get in and get logged into Zoom, and then we'll go ahead and start our discussion. So if you'll just be patient with us just for another minute or two. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Angela H. Brown, and I'm the Executive Director for Craft Lake City. And I'd like to welcome you to our Lunch and Learn discussion today about our latest exhibition, Celebration of the Hand, Safe Not Safe. Before we start, just a few housekeeping items. If you could please keep your microphone muted so that all attendees can hear the presentation. I'd like to also let you know that we have closed captions. You're welcome to turn those on. They're at the bottom portion of your screen. If you see that CC little button, go ahead and press on that, and using the live transcripts, and those will go ahead and populate on your screen. If you have any questions, please do put them in the chat. We'll be waiting until the end of the conversation to go ahead and address those questions, but we'd love to have you interact with our presenter and our guests today and ask your questions about the conversation that we'll be having. We will also be posting a survey in the chat as well, and we would love to have you please fill out that information, as it helps us improve these Lunch and Learn events, as well as this gives us important information for our grantors. We will also email you those as well. So today's presentation will consist, again, my name is Angela H. Brown. I'm the Executive Director. I'm gonna give you just a little information about our organization, and then I'll be turning the microphone over to our moderator, Kaneischa Johnson. And then we've got two artists joining us today who have concepted this incredible work that we're going to be talking about. Denae Shanidiin, Denae Shanidiin, and then also Jonathan Canlas. I'd like to just briefly thank our sponsors that made it possible for us to put up this work on the downtown city streets of Salt Lake City. Now, Craft Lake City, if you're not familiar with us, our mission is to educate, promote, and inspire local artisans while elevating the creative culture of the Utah arts community through science, technology, and art. And one of the ways that we do that is by hosting our large-scale annual Craft Lake City Do-It-Yourself Festival that happens at the Utah State Fair Park the second weekend of every August. We feature over 300 local makers, 50 local bands, and of course, lots of other really fun parts of that festival. We also just recently launched a holiday market up in the Ogden area, and that is coming up in December. We also do virtual programming, and we have workshops that we do online. We have a really fun partnership with the Natural History Museum of Utah coming up. We also have virtual programming that you can log in at any time and view as well. Now, we have been part of a really fun curation project down on 300 South on Broadway for the past 8 or so years. And this project is called our Celebration of the Hand, which we'll be talking about today. This is where we are able to commission local artisans to display their work on the streets of downtown Salt Lake City. We also work with local nonprofits under the Local Voices moniker to program these same metal steel frames that we also refer to as plakats, which is the German word for billboard. So these plakats, we rotate out programming between our Local Voices, which is again working with nonprofits, or our Celebration of the Hand programming, which is local artists. And today we are very excited to have both Denae and Jonathan as local artists talking about their work that is exhibited in the plakats currently. And in order to talk about this new exhibition that is available for free on the streets again of Salt Lake City, downtown on Broadway between 2nd West and 3rd West, we've got Denae, we've got Kaneischa with us, Kaneischa Johnson. So Kaneischa Johnson, thank you so much for being here. Kaneischa and I actually have known each other for a number of years. Besides working at Craft Lake City, I also work for Slug Magazine, and Kaneischa and I had the privilege of working together for a number of years through Kaneischa's work at Velour, which is an incredible music venue down in Utah County. Kaneischa is now doing inclusive leadership work, and she's a cultural advocate and consultant, and has been transforming teams, organizations, and individuals through her years across globally distributed and high growth SaaS tech startups, community development, and nonprofit spaces. So thank you so much, Kaneisha, for being here today. I'm going to go ahead and pass the microphone on to you.
Awesome. Thank you for that warm welcome. I appreciate it. I'm really grateful to be here. I think it's those in our circle kind of know I'm no longer living in Utah. I actually am residing in Austin, Texas. And any opportunity I have to continue to be involved in the fun parts of the Salt Lake and Utah Valley community is just a great invite. And there are a lot of people on this call are basically family to me. So I'm really honored to be included here and honored to help host this conversation. I want to introduce our guests today. They're the collaborators and artists behind this project that is being featured through the Celebration of the Hand. The project is called Safe, Not Safe. And we have with us Jonathan Canlas. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, Kaneisha with the good hair from that couple photos back. Not that your hair doesn't look great now, but yeah, I'm a photographer. I've been working with Denae for, well, almost, I think it's a little over 3 years now. And with her group, Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women. And we kind of came together with this project with an idea that she had of photographing people of color and Black Indigenous people, residents of Utah, in their safe and not safe spaces. And it's been a really great opportunity to kind of showcase what, I guess, to our counterparts might not be a place you would question being in and not feeling safe, right? So I'm the photographer aspect of this project. So
yeah, I have to mention that I first met Denae through her work with the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women activism and her art as activism, and have gotten closer to you through this work as well. And it's really incredible to see the impact this work has had. And I'm really glad to see that this project in particular is being featured through the Celebration of the Hand project, and being able to actually invite the community in to connect with this in new ways, because all of the work that both of you do in your art as activism is been very healing for me in so many different ways. And it's been helping me build community and find community in myself, and find healing through similar experiences. So I want to invite Denae up to the microphone, the virtual mic. Denae, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself as well?
Thanks, John. Thanks, Kaneisha. Thank you, Angela, and everyone here with us today. Just introduce myself into Nebazad. Got Shikedo Shadine, Sheye Denae Shanidiin Yinashne, Hanagakni, one who walks around clan Nishle, Korean Bashachi, Kinachini, Red House people, Dashache, Bilagana, patriarchal colonizer, Dashanella. Thank you for being here, everyone. This project is really important to me. It's been a really beautiful way to connect with people in our communities and to illustrate, these sacred stories of resilience and kind of our strengths as people of color in a world where white supremacy is permeated in every aspect of our lives. And I think this project is a good way of illustrating these stories that is victim-centered, right? Like we have a cultural, social responsibility to honor those who have experienced harm. And I think that safe portion of it is also equally important as the stories of racism, these violent acts that were committed against these people of color. And their safe spaces really provide that kind of holistic healing and that balance to these stories, because we do have safe spaces, and those safe spaces are really important to how we move forward as people of color.
Thank you for introducing the project that way. I think one of the ways I've connected most with this project really quickly is, you know, on your perspective, on your end, you're creating the space to have those victim-centered stories. And on the receiving end, as a person receiving this in the audience, it's like actually an opportunity to witness someone's pain, to hold space for it, and to reflect upon it and consider our roles in it. On our next slide, we have just a sample of what these plakats look like. Looks like John posting up in front of one of those plakats. And the premise of this project of Safe Not Safe, this is displaying images of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in Utah who were asked to present themselves in a space where they felt the safest at a time in their life, as well as a space where they do not feel safe. And I think the iconic thing about that messaging too is that in this opportunity to witness these experiences and these stories is also the opportunity to witness something that is often silent. These are often stories we don't get the opportunity to hear or see. I found myself very represented in a lot of these stories, as much as I participated in witnessing them as someone who didn't know someone else's experience. And so I find that really healing and cathartic, and I'm really grateful to keep these conversations happening about your project. So our next slide just shows a sample of the images on one of the plakats. This is actually on display next to squatters on 300 South. And these images, Denae, are so beautiful. So Denae is not only, of course, the creator and collaborator with John, but also has her own story, her own experiences. And so on the left, and you'll see this on the plakat, there's text to accompany each of these stories. But on the left is a photo of Denae and her sister Priscilla. This is a safe photo at home with her sister. And on the right is a photo of Denae on the steps of the Utah State Capitol, which is a not safe space. Denae, I don't know if you feel like mentioning anything about your personal story related to these photos before we move into this conversation a little more. Would you like to represent these at all?
Yes, you know, at home, I think as an Indigenous person, our home spaces are really important to us. You know, I come from a matriarchal society, and we really do embody that way of life. Women are very respected in our home, and that's like a reflection of the teachings of our homeland and how to be good to our environment and to our children. And I think there's such a juxtaposition between kind of the traditional values of my way and also existing within a patriarchal landscape and systems of white supremacy. I think I myself, doing missing and murdered work and working for a tribal organization that, you know, does violence prevention work on Indigenous people, I'm very much aware of how the Utah legislature policies enable and act and sustain violence against Indigenous people. And I myself have also experienced, you know, personal attacks at the Capitol. And it's a very violent place to be, from the murals to the sculptures, to the narrative around everything, to how the legislature is run. It's definitely a place where a lot of racism is sustained through policy and through leadership. And so that place really does represent a location and concept and embodies the symbolism where we don't belong in those spaces. Our voices don't belong. In fact, we're so much of our voices and our sense of belonging to a place that we, you know, come from, you know, it's just not recognized. There's so much erasure in the state of Utah, and I think that's important to recognize.
Mm-hmm. There's so much cognitive dissonance between these two images and experience, and I think that cognitive dissonance itself is gaslighting. It feels abusive, it's traumatic, to sit in those spaces where you feel free and liberated and honored and able to caretake and feel warm and good, and to go out into the world and have such a different experience, not only different, but such a violent experience, and to be surrounded by images that honor violence and practices and legislation that honors violence. That's one of the things that hits me most in my heart when I hear you talk about this and witness this. And I also have found it's been a really good gateway to help reconcile some of the fog that was in my mind a lot of the time that I spent in Utah, amongst very kind of white supremacist spaces, not kind of very white supremacist spaces. I appreciate you sharing your story about that.
I think one thing to maybe give a backstory of the image on the right. This wasn't planned. We were just downtown, and this was the location that Denae had chosen. But this was, I believe this was January 20th, 2020. Like National Guard were on the steps because this was during, the supposed peaceful transition of presidencies. And there were very aggressive Caucasian men there with guns. Like, I mean, you can see it on his shoulder. I don't know if you can notice that, but that strapped around his shoulder is a gun. It's some kind of rifle. And he was there with a handful of other people. And I feel, I mean, I did not feel safe there. He was pacing around, and I just told Denae, I'm like, I need you to stand right here while his back is to you. And the irony is he's carrying a flag that's an American flag that's upside down, which is like the distress signal, right? When, this project that we're showcasing is, I mean, whatever distress he quote unquote is feeling is nowhere near the amplified feelings that even I had as like, we're gonna take this and we're gonna bounce. Like, I don't want to be around. I don't want to find out what this guy's gonna do. That's walking around with a gun just on the Capitol steps with National Guard. Like literally, there was a dozen National Guards at the top of the stairs. I feel really lucky that we ended up there at that time at that place without any kind of planning. It just happened.
Yeah, it's not a fully developed thought, but this is like, there is whiteness in what he's actually doing, with the down flag. There is an appropriatedness of pain there. And to convolute it as his pain, in this so-called country, it's just another white supremacy.
It's the image on the right is there's lots of things going on.
Honestly, if we could spend our whole hour together, we could talk just about that image and whiteness and white supremacy and perceived power and perceived loss of power. Denae, your term about appropriated pain is spot on. But I'll let people continue to witness this image and develop some thoughts around it and hopefully come back to it on their own. Today, we in particular would like to ask both you, John and Denae, about some images that you wanted to feature in this conversation. So John, we'll start with you, and we're going to look at some images of someone I think a lot of people in our Salt Lake and Utah community are familiar with. And this is Moroni. Moroni is, I think, someone that I just honor his work, his experience, his story so greatly. And I think being allowed in to this story in these photos is something that we should all just take a moment to consider while John will take us through the experience of shooting this and relaying Moroni's story about these images. John, do you want to tell us a bit about these first photos? These are Moroni's safe photos.
Yeah, this was so I'll echo everything you said. He's a wonderful human being. He's just delightful. Like to be around in his presence, his energy is just very positive, and he's doing really great things in terms of activism and change, and stepping in the right directions. These two photos were taken at his home up in Salt Lake, just inside and then outside. Again, it was in January. So we did this shoot twice, and this was, I believe, the first time. So we showed up, and I brought him inside. I kind of wanted to showcase his environment. There were a couple other shots that I didn't include in this, but just something inside and outside and the look on his face. He looks happy, he looks safe, and that was the point, right? And then if you go to the next slide, we went and photographed him in his unsafe space, and that image on the left is so. It says so much. So his unsafe space obviously was down at Temple Square, the LDS Mormon temple there in Salt Lake City. I believe on his plakat, is that how you say it? I'm not sure.
Yes.
On his plakat, it mentions in his text that he's an openly gay. I think at the time he was Mormon. It mentions that he went through 13 years of conversion therapy, which in itself is horrific. And then I think it ended with it not working, and so they quote unquote excommunicated him. And I know for a fact many people that reside in Utah to this place is not a place that is anything that's not safe. It's the complete opposite for them. And we wrapped this shoot. When we met him that day, you can kind of see it. He had like a little mark above his eye, and his hand was kind of wrapped. And he had kind of said, "Oh, I had slipped on the ice the day before." And so, I didn't think anything of it. It didn't look anything super bad, but it looked like he had fallen of some kind of tumble or something, And then after we had taken these photos, I delivered them to him because we give them all of the images, right? We give them all the files and everything. And he called back. I don't know if he called Denae. I'm pretty sure he reached out to Denae, but he was like, "Is there any way we could do a reshoot?" And my heart sunk because I thought maybe this might happen. Like maybe someone doesn't like how they look, like their vanity might get the better of them, And so like he's asking, "Hey, can we reshoot it?" Which, hey, that's fine, but that really wasn't the case. So if you go to the next slide, we went and reshot it because I believe the night before that shoot at the Salt Lake Temple, he was in a taxi in this intersection right here. And again, to speak towards how these safe and unsafe spaces are very personal. Like my wife and I, so this is on 2nd South, right in front of that. There's like a post office there. One of my wife's favorite restaurants is also there. We go there all the time. And, I would never think it as an unsafe space, but he was in a taxi, and this taxi driver was just saying these horrible racist things to him, and wouldn't let him out of the car. And I think in his own words, is his humanity couldn't take it anymore. So he opened the door and rolled out. And this is where he rolled out. And we took these photos a month after that initial shoot at the Salt Lake Temple. And I don't know if I'm on my laptop, so I don't know how well it translates, but he had scrapes still on his body a month later from this. On his side, from where his hand was, there was that cut above his eye. It's crazy. Well, I guess it really isn't crazy. I hope a lot of you that are listening to this think that it's crazy that this kind of stuff is still happening in 2021. It's not crazy because it is happening. And that's kind of the point of this series, is to bring to light these stories that our counterparts here in Utah as Caucasian people don't really experience. I'm not going to diminish to say that things like bad things don't happen to them as well, but there's a lot of, like Denae has said, deep racism, colonialism that is perpetuating this problem.
Mm-hmm.
And the point of these images are, I mean, I'm not here to shock you, but I'm here to shake you up
Mm-hmm.
and to hopefully open your eyes and make you realize that it's not all soft, fuzzy feelings down at the Salt Lake Temple. This intersection on 2nd South, even though it's in front of Carson's Kitchen, which is like one of our favorite restaurants, isn't always the safest of places for Black, Indigenous people of color.
Angela, would you mind going back to the temple photos for a moment? Something that struck me about this photo was it looks like it was taken on that platform where couples stand after they've gotten married and get their temple portrait done.
Yeah, the cupcake, if you will.
The cupcake. I wouldn't know.
I used to shoot a ton of weddings, so yes, that's what.
I mean, who could blame you? I mean, I've been there many times myself, but and also the enormity of the size of the temple. And when you think about the presence of violence being around you, and when there are monuments of violence on your street in your city that you can't turn a corner without seeing, I just really appreciate how that is captured in this image as a part of Moroni's experience, and also as an opportunity to remember that like these places are in front of us. And on the next slide, where those portraits of him on 200 South, any of us that walk down this street, we cross that crosswalk, and I hope that people will pause in that crosswalk and honor the experience that Moroni had in that space. I think that's one thing I really hope comes through about some of these, not as the collaborator on this project, but as someone who seeks out impact. I hope that there are people who can continue to connect to these when they're not in front of the placards, when they can notice where some of these are shot and continue to witness that. The next slide really shows us what Moroni's plakat looks like. And I just love that safe photo of Moroni. I love that peaceful, happy smile on his face. And I'm so happy that he feels that.
That was the point, was letting
the radiance.
Yes, yeah. That's very much him, you know.
When we're safe, we feel good. When we're safe, we are ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, I think one important thing to talk about when we're discussing violence on Indigenous people is all of us come from a history of violence under white supremacy and colonization, and we carry that within our bodies. And when we come into this world, it's not if we experience violence, it's when we experience violence, and it will happen multiple times throughout our lifetime. And you know, Moroni has many stories, unfortunately, of these acts of violence on him. And I think that's one of the most difficult things to face as people of color, because, you know, when we go out into the world, it's important for us to exist in a way that feels authentic to ourselves. Carrying those past traumas and having them reinforced by our environment on a daily basis. Even within the work that we do, you know, Moroni is incredible when it comes to using his intelligence. He's one of the most intelligent people that I know, and his intelligence is rooted in trying to find a way of how we can heal as Indigenous people in this world through our own ways. And he's incredibly important to my life and to the life of my tribe. So I think honoring him in this way and continuing to protect these people who, you know, give back to us so much, you know, and Moroni being a gay man, he, in our traditional ways, in juxtaposition between the church's teachings, these were important sacred knowledge keepers to our communities and to our ceremonies and our way of life. You know, if we grew up in a traditional way and if we lived in a traditional environment, you know, these kinds of harms wouldn't be experienced.
I also want to just say and recognize that the individual braveness of each of these subjects. You know, I mean, to have rolled out here out of a cab, out of a moving cab, and then agree to be photographed the way he is on the right. You know, I think we all should be really grateful to them for them sharing their story with us.
I'd like to ask, you don't have to get too deep or specific, but I'd like to ask John before we move into kind of Denae's selection of images. John, do you have a summary of kind of what your experience has been like, your experience, like what's happening within you while you've been shooting some of these images?
Yeah, so I mean, almost all of them, all of the subjects that we've shot have been curated and I guess gathered by Denae. You know, I've know a handful of them, but I didn't know their stories. And so like hearing them it's very I mean, it's heartbreaking, you know, that this stuff is happening. There were a couple stories, I won't name names, but I think the first person we shot had to deal with sexual violence, and in a place that I couldn't fathom. It was up at Silver Lake, like in Brighton. You know, when you go to Brighton, there's like that big parking lot, and there's that like big, huge lake that like every time I ever go there, it's just massive amounts of families, little kids running around screaming, you know, and like families walking around that lake. And as we went with this certain individual, we stopped at where they said it happened. It's just unfathomable that those kinds of horrific acts happen in broad daylight in front of other people that didn't even, whether they were scared to stop to help or to inquire to help or whatever. It just it's crazy. I really hope, if for those that do get the opportunity to go up to Broadway and see this on that block right in front of Squatters, that you take the time to read their stories. It is I believe it's what we owe these subjects who were brave enough to allow us to document and share their story.
Thank you. Denae, so you also selected a few images that you'd like to share about here. Can you tell us about these safe, not safe side-by-sides here, and about maybe her story a little bit?
So this is Michelle Brown. She's actually the chair of MMIW plus Utah. And so she does a lot of work with missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. The image on the left is in her home. Michelle talks about how she endured a lot of physical and psychological abuse within her childhood home. And then as an adult, curating a home that felt loving and where she wasn't, you know, exposed to those kinds of harms. She describes it as her having control over her living space and a feeling at ease and relaxed where she lives. The photo on the right is just any gas station. She says, "I'm always cautious when I'm leaving my vehicle alone. The loss of control I feel when I vacate my locked door often leads to fear and me being highly guarded. I had men use the opportunity to comment on me multiple occasions, including to tell me that you would be more beautiful if you smiled, all while filling their vehicle with gas. I would often ignore the comments and not even finish filling my vehicle and leave as fast as possible. If a stranger tries to engage with me on that level in that space, I do not feel safe. There are too many stories of women last being seen at gas stations, and I do not want that to be me. And, that experience of being at gas stations, I hear a lot of stories, doing missing and murdered work, and there are perpetrators at gas stations, especially in more rural areas. And as an Indigenous woman, I think Michelle recognizes that context. I think it's important to also acknowledge that Utah is in the top 10 for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls cases out of 71 surveyed cities. So Utah is not a safe space for Indigenous women, and the rates of violence that we experience are not okay. So yeah, Michelle, I encourage you guys to all follow her work, and missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls of Utah. So
I'm grateful to Michelle for
Michelle,
being available for
story.
these. Mhm.
Yes. The following slide is JT. He has been a longtime friend of mine. JT is a gay man as well, and he chose his unsafe space in front of the LDS church where he was indoctrinated and baptized. And I think for a lot of people of color in the state of Utah, with such a high presence of the Mormon church, we've all have our stories, and these are his story is so congruent with many of the things that we all have experienced ourselves. I was also baptized in the church, and I think his story reminded me of why I felt so uncomfortable and unsafe in the church when I was younger. I did have friends who were queer and who, even at a young age, I knew that the church did not accept them and their families did not accept them. Growing up in Utah, you are exposed to those youth and those peers who die by suicide. Mm-hmm. And that happened multiple times throughout my youth years. And it's ugly. It's not okay. And it's really tragic. And I think it's about, we're in a time where these kind of stories and narratives are being exposed, and we're all kind of healing from them. I'm seeing a lot of people step away from this kind of indoctrination and say that it's not okay. And largely they're people of color, and they're people within my circles. And it's not easy to leave such a place, but there are safer places that can acknowledge your beauty and your intelligence and your identity, instead of diminishing it and controlling it, abusing it. So I'm really proud of these subjects for, talking about these things, because I think it can encourage other people to do the same.
Looks like JT's safe space is in a car. Mm-hmm. Do you know much more about that?
I think he's such a beautiful and fun person that I can imagine just cruising around and driving in the car and, listening to music. He loves music. Yeah, I can relate to that. And
same.
The cars were actually, when I think about the cars and the stories and narratives around cars, a lot of our subjects had like Moroni's, Davina's. We had another subject who also found their safe space in a car. And that was interesting. But we heard a lot of stories about people being hit by cars driven by white men.
Mm.
And I think, not to say that we don't experience, because we all live in a world where we experience patriarchy and we embody patriarchy. There's a lot of patriarchy within Indigenous communities right now because of colonization and the influence of the church, Christianity, and those kinds of teachings. But most of the perpetrators in these stories, if not all of them, are white people, primarily white men.
I can highly relate to the safe spaces being in the car and in the homes. I think those are things I've known and I've probably vocalized at some point in my life, but this series like drew my attention to why those spaces have been so safe. And it's this, like Michelle's story, being able to create the home that feels safe and feels warm and feels welcoming. It's like these opportunities to have our own spaces is so important. And I think in relation to Utah doesn't feel like home for a lot of people, doesn't have like the feelings of home when you're out in social Utah for the most part. And I like that we have this opportunity sometimes to have our houses, to have our cars, but we should feel at home wherever we go. We should feel at home in our community. And that's just something I've been sitting on a lot, is this, all of us should feel that. All of us should feel that access.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really grateful for all the stories that each of you have shared, and the subjects, of course, for their vulnerability and willingness to participate. And like both John and Denae have mentioned, being photographed in the places where you have experienced some intense trauma is likely to be a very intense experience on its own. And I can only wish that everyone who has participated in this project has been able to meet some healing as a part of this, as much as I have been and continue to receive healing from being able to witness it. We've got a few questions that we want to run by the both of you, if you're open to it, and either one of you can answer whatever feels good. But one of the participants in today's audience has already asked, they'd like to know more about how your love for people influences your projects, how you approach these projects.
I think the work kind of speaks for itself. It's really a great opportunity to give a voice to someone that possibly here to date hasn't had one. You know, when we started this project, we didn't do it with the final idea of these ending up being plackets on Broadway. It was when Denae approached me, this was a story we wanted to tell. We didn't know what would happen with it. We did know that we wanted to get it out there, whether that would be like a large gallery showing or something. But I mean, the whole reason behind doing this is a love for the subjects and for people of color, and for our counterparts as well, because we're trying to help raise awareness.
Another question that we've had was some curiosity around how your candidates were selected for safe, not safe. Denae, do you have any interest in responding to that?
I think in my own personal world, and this kind of connected to the last question, my love for my relations is big. You know, I think there's a part of me that was given to me by my ancestors in a way that I truly care about the well-being, the happiness of my relations. And in that, I truly care about the traumas that they carry and the pains that they carry. And I think to acknowledge both of those things and to nurture those narratives in a way that we can move and process together instead of them doing it alone. I've experienced that with John. John has photographed my family in a way that feels like it was indicative of a time where I needed that healing and that acknowledgement. And afterwards, like ceremony, it felt like prayer and it felt like relief from these things that I was carrying, these narratives that I was carrying of trauma and sadness within my family. And so I think that is the power of these stories and acknowledging their beauty and their resilience. And they're still beautiful in these spaces of harm. They're so beautiful in these spaces of harm. And often they're the only beautiful thing in these spaces of harm. And I think reaching out to my loved ones, people who I've grown up with or connected with, people in my community, and a lot of them I didn't know where their safe or not safe space would be, but it is very interesting how personal these stories can be. Like this last one, she's a city planner here in the Salt Lake Valley. Beautiful, beautiful person, beautiful friend. She's really badass. She can outrun any man. She's amazing. She can go long periods of time on her bike, and that's the space that she loves being in, is outdoors and doing those kinds of physical activities. But she also experiences those harms in the outdoor industry. And I think I do see a lot of talk around the outdoor industry in terms of, it being unsafe for people of color and the appropriation of indigeneity within those spaces. But Nikki carries all those narratives with her when she bikes around. And yeah, these people I've known, and I think it was just my way of honoring their stories, and with the help of John. Couldn't have done it without John.
Well, it's obvious, I think each of you approach storytelling in a way that really honors the people that you're connecting with and allows us to witness. And Denae, you mentioned something a moment ago about your experience with John shooting your family. And there's really something special to being witnessed and to have to being seen and witnessed and have your experiences being witnessed. And I hold so much value for that and really just honor the opportunity to do this. I can't say that enough. Before we hand the reins back to Angela, are there anything else on your mind that you'd like to share about how the community experiences this project, or maybe any other notes that you'd like to share about your experience in it?
Let me think. We're in a time of deep awareness as people, non-Indigenous, white people, people of color. And it's not to say these stories and realities didn't exist prior to last year. And I think, people of color their realities were so exposed at a systemic level. And we are starting to reframe these kinds of things in context to white supremacy. And we have stories from inside our homes, media, in our workplaces. I've talked with all my friends, and we're all kind of contextualizing and processing, from the moment we were born to up until now, into our adulthood and our social environment, our work environment. And we're starting to acknowledge these things, and we need to keep going on that path, because actually nothing's being done right now, and there is a lot of complacency in those spaces. But we need actual change. We need these people of color in places of power. We need them to be paid the same. We need to feel okay in our, places where we practice our religion, where we practice our beliefs. We need to be able to go walk in the street and run in the street without experiencing a life or death situation. And there's, in whatever way and in whatever work that you do, to those who are listening, whether it's within your home, in your workplace, and at the Capitol, you need to undermine white supremacy to get to the root core of these issues. Because violence is at the root of the culture of white supremacy and patriarchy. And until we acknowledge those things and address them, nothing's going to change. So I encourage everyone to kind of leave with that thought process.
Respectfully, please fuck shit up.
Oh, do it.
I just, yeah.
People of color shouldn't be the ones doing that. This is a call out to white people and to men. Show up and do the work, because I think people of color and women and LGBTQ and two-spirit people we're tired. I've been tired. So
we do have a saying in the Black community, I've been tired. It's a very relatable phrase. I mean, we've been doing this work always, and we won't stop doing the work. And there's a lot of credit to people for not having, we don't require people of color to do this work. It's not an obligation. If you see people of color doing this work, it's because we feel a drive to, we must, we have to do something. But the onus is not on us. And I hope that participating in community projects like this, you can find your sense of responsibility and accountability to disrupt those patterns. You can play a game that's my favorite, just like the 6 degrees to, is it Kevin Bacon? Everything goes back to white supremacy. I dare you to 6 degrees or less, connect these violences back to white supremacy and then disrupt it. It's really fun. It's a fun game. That's my challenge as a part of this. But John, anything to add before I hand this over to Angela?
Just on behalf of Denae, myself, and everyone who's been a part of this project, thank you to Angela and everyone at Craft Lake City for giving us a platform to broadcast this. And thanks to you, Kaneisha, with the good hair.
Thank you so much to Craft Lake City. It's unprecedented. For the second time around, Craft Lake City also did a series on the book hots for missing and murdered Indigenous people and other colonial violence. So and I've never seen that kind of dialogue in Salt Lake, and I really appreciate Craft Lake City in Celebration of the Hand for giving us this opportunity. That is the work, and I appreciate you being and facilitating the work with us, because it's so important. Thank you, Angela. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, Denae and John, I really appreciate you as always. Angela, I'll go ahead and pass it back to you if you want to wrap this up. Remind us where we can see all these placards displayed.
Thank you so much, Kaneisha, for leading such a thoughtful and wonderful discussion. And thank you, Denae and Jonathan, for creating this work, opening our eyes to white supremacy and reminding us that there's a lot of work to be done. And I really appreciate everyone being here to share this discussion with your friends and family. Also, go down and see the work. You can actually find it on Broadway. Though we really love that you can see all of these 8 placards within a 1 block radius. As you can see from this visual, we've got 2 on one side of the street and then the other 6 right after one another on the other side of the street. It's a very compelling exhibition, reading the stories, honoring the individuals and the unsafe experiences they have gone through on our city streets. I think that is one of the most powerful things about this work, is seeing it on the streets, even just a couple of blocks, like some of our presenters have mentioned, from where these incidents happened. So thank you again for creating this work that we could help amplify. And we hope to work with you again, Denae. It's been such a pleasure to work with you on an annual basis. And I can't wait to see what you and Jonathan do next, and how we can continue to support amplifying the incredible work that you're doing. And Kaneisha, thank you again as well for such a great conversation. One last thing on the wrap up, I just need to thank again our supporters that were able to make this possible. The Celebration of the Hand program is supported in part by the National Endowment for the Arts, the Zoo Arts and Parks program, the USA Division of Arts and Museums, the Temporary Museum of Permanent Change, the Salt Lake City Arts Council, the Center for the Living City, and the George S. and Dolores Story Eccles Foundation. We will be posting a recording of this, so again, we'd love to have you please share it with your friends and families and have your own discussions about this incredible work. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.